The year is 1944. The place is Leyte, Philippines. Not the sun-drenched beaches promised in propaganda posters, but a sweltering malarial hellscape where the jungle itself seemed to be the most persistent enemy. The air hung thick with the metallic scent of rust, decay, and unspent cordite. This was the war distilled to its most primal form, a grinding, brutal attrition measured in inches of mud and the rapid depletion of morale. For the American GIs of the 96th Infantry Division, pushing inland from the San Pedro Bay, every step was a confrontation with an entrenched, fanatical defense. The strategic stakes were immense. Leyte was the gateway to the rest of the Philippines and to the eventual invasion of Japan itself. But for a young sergeant named Danny Callahan, the immediate stakes were simply survival. Danny was not a hero of the headlines. He was a forward scout, a man whose expertise lay in the quiet, methodical art of not being seen. His weapon, the M1 Garand, was an extension of his will, a symbol of American industrial might that contrasted starkly with the desperate close-quarters fighting favored by the Japanese. The distinctive ping of its emptying clip was often the last sound an enemy heard, but it was also a sound that signaled a momentary vulnerability. The Japanese defense of Leyte was commanded by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya. His strategy was simple, if brutal: bleed the Americans dry. Their tactics centered on deep, hidden bunkers and relentless banzai charges designed not to win ground, but to inflict maximum psychological and physical damage. The technology they relied upon was often older: the Type 99 Arisaka rifle, the Type 92 heavy machine gun, but wielded with a terrifying commitment that the Americans found difficult to comprehend. The paradox of this campaign was clear. The American force possessed overwhelming superiority in air power, naval bombardment, and logistical capacity. Yet they were being held in check by a determined force, willing to sacrifice everything, often against impossible odds. It was this commitment that led to the existence of the remote outpost Danny and his squad stumbled upon. A minor, forgotten installation nestled deep in the mountainous interior, far from the main lines. It wasn't a defensive fortress. It was an impromptu medical and communications relay, manned by a skeleton crew of veteran soldiers, and critically, a handful of nurses and non-combatants. The intelligence reports had mentioned only light resistance in the area, a cruel bureaucratic euphemism for the lethal skirmishes they actually encountered. As they approached, the silence was unsettling, heavier than the usual jungle cacophony. It was the silence before a storm, or worse, the silence after a massacre. The technological irony of the conflict was never far from Danny's mind. They carried with them the SCR-300 radio, a marvel of miniaturization that kept them connected to the grand strategic picture. Yet their immediate fate was decided by the primitive slice of a machete through the undergrowth. Their reconnaissance was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, inhuman cry of a man under duress, followed by the familiar, chilling sound of a rifle bolt being worked. They dropped immediately, the thick, humid air pressing them down like a physical weight. Inside the makeshift compound, the scene was one of chaos barely suppressed. A small detachment of Japanese soldiers, their uniforms shredded and stained, were executing a brutal cleanup. The fight had been short. The dead were already being moved. The stench of blood was fresh. Amidst this grim efficiency, one figure stood out. A woman, clad in what appeared to be the tattered remains of a nursing uniform, being roughly interrogated. She was slight, but her posture was rigid, defiant. The guards were demanding information on a failed radio transmission, a desperate attempt to signal the main force that they were about to be overrun. They were threatening her with a Type 100 submachine gun, a piece of Japanese tech designed for close-quarters brutality. Danny, viewing the scene through the aperture sight of his Garand, felt a cold, professional assessment take over. Standard operating procedure dictated they should retreat, call in air support, and let the jungle swallow the outpost. The strategic value was minimal, but then, the woman's eyes, wide, terrified, yet focused with a strange resolve, met his from across the clearing for a fleeting second. It was a projection of human fear and courage that transcended the uniform she wore. It was a momentary breach in the dehumanizing doctrine of war. They told us they were monsters, a historian would later recount. The Japanese command drilled into their soldiers that the Americans were barbarians with no honor. The American command countered with equally ferocious propaganda. But in that tiny clearing, under the dense canopy, all that propaganda dissolved into the single, shared terror of two human beings caught in the machinery of total war. Danny knew the risk. Intervening for one non-combatant, especially a Japanese national, could compromise the entire squad and the larger objective. Yet, the tactical opportunity was too perfect to ignore. The guards were distracted, focused on their interrogation. The decision was a flash, a reflex born of something deeper than military training. He whispered a command to his second-in-command, a curt order to cover his flank, and then, with the silent determination of a man crossing a moral Rubicon, he raised his rifle. The shot that followed was clean, precise, and immediately shattered the oppressive silence of the jungle, setting into motion a chain of events far more intricate and devastating than a simple rescue. It was the first crack in a long-held strategic facade. If you found this opening intriguing, remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We delve deep into the untold stories and crucial technologies that defined the Second World War. Don't miss the next chapter on this incredible journey. The single shot from Danny Callahan's M1 Garand was not merely a round fired at a target. It was a deliberate, irreversible disruption of the prevailing doctrine. The round struck the Japanese soldier holding the Type 100, dropping him instantly. The ensuing chaos was the tactical opening Danny had gambled on. His squad, seasoned veterans of jungle warfare, immediately laid down suppressing fire, their automatic bars, Browning automatic rifles, chattering a message of overwhelming American firepower. This wasn't a protracted firefight, it was a decisive surgical strike. The remaining Japanese soldiers scattered, retreating into the dense, almost impenetrable undergrowth, their primary instinct being to preserve their few remaining communication devices. The nurse, initially frozen by the shock, bolted towards the relative safety of a crumbling storage shack. Danny and his team moved fast, securing the perimeter with practiced efficiency. They had perhaps 3 minutes before the retreating Japanese regrouped for a counterattack, or worse, sacrificed themselves in a suicidal banzai charge. Danny found the woman huddled behind a stack of rotting supply crates. She was shaking violently, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of profound relief and ingrained, terrified distrust. Her name, he would later learn, was Kiku. She was a Japanese army nurse, attached to a forward observation unit. The rules of engagement were clear. POWs were to be secured and handed over to military intelligence. But Japanese personnel, especially women, rarely survived capture attempts. Many were under standing orders to take their own lives rather than face the perceived dishonor and unknown horrors of American imprisonment. The first attempt at communication was a tense, failed exchange of mutually incomprehensible fear. Danny tried rudimentary Japanese phrases taught during basic training, Daijobu da, it's all right, Kofuku shiro, surrender. Kiku only stared, her lips moving silently. It was the visual language of their situation that ultimately cut through the linguistic barrier. Danny unslung his weapon and slowly reached into his pack, pulling out a field dressing, a small, universal sign of non-aggression and aid. He gestured to a shallow cut on her arm, a relic of the earlier struggle. In that moment, the uniform stopped meaning everything, said Dr. Robert Lee, a military psychologist specializing in the Pacific War experience. The ingrained hate, the propaganda that painted the other side as subhuman, it was impossible to maintain when facing a bleeding person who was clearly not a combatant. This was the moment where the rules of the larger conflict yielded to the immediate, desperate logic of human survival. As Danny was quickly treating the wound, his sergeant, a tough but pragmatic New Yorker named Rizzo, barked, "Callahan, what the hell are we doing? We can't lug her through the jungle. This isn't a rescue mission. We need to move." Rizzo's logic was sound. They were deep in enemy territory. A Japanese prisoner, especially a high-value non-combatant, was a monumental liability. But Kiku, watching the exchange, understood the threat. She quickly and silently pointed to a small, heavily fortified area adjacent to the shack. It was protected by sandbags and camouflage, clearly a command post or supply depot, indicating a location of importance far beyond its small garrison. Danny, reading her intention, gestured to Rizzo to cover him. He approached the post cautiously, Garand ready. The entrance was booby-trapped, a fact Kiku frantically tried to signal, using a series of rapid hand gestures. She wasn't just a captive. She was actively, if silently, collaborating in the moment of her capture. This was the second paradox. Japanese nurses and medical staff were typically seen as equally dedicated to the imperial cause, trained to endure all hardship and maintain complete silence. Danny disabled the tripwire, a thin, almost invisible strand of fiber-optic cable repurposed from a downed plane, a piece of sophisticated technology in the hands of desperate men. Inside the post, they found the typical contents: maps, a short-range field radio, and, crucially, a small, heavily locked metal case. The case was no larger than a standard briefcase, and it was unmarked. The Japanese soldiers had died protecting the radio, not this case. Kiku, upon seeing it, immediately averted her gaze, her terror visibly ratcheting up several notches. It was clear that the box was not merely valuable. It was a secret. The SCR-300 on Rizzo's back crackled to life. Command was demanding an immediate status report. They were late. They had engaged. They had a prisoner. They had an unknown piece of enemy equipment. Danny made the call, omitting the presence of Kiku, but detailing the discovery of the locked case, describing its construction as alien to local Japanese gear. He was already protecting Kiku, a conscious break from protocol, recognizing that the box might be the only reason Command would allow them to risk bringing her in. The immediate reply from Battalion Command was terse and electrifying. Secure the box. Disregard all else. Extraction is priority 1. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to open it. Move, Sergeant. The priority had shifted entirely. The tactical landscape had changed from a minor skirmish into a high-stakes intelligence operation. Kiku's silent guidance had delivered them a prize far greater than the territory they had captured. What the Americans didn't know was that the contents of the box had the potential to unravel months of painstaking strategic planning, tied not just to the Philippines, but to the heavily guarded airspace over mainland Japan. Now, Danny and his squad, burdened by an unexpected prisoner and a locked box, faced the impossible reality of a 48-hour trek through enemy-infested jungle, not towards their lines, but towards a newly designated emergency extraction point. A journey of desperate survival, with the ghosts of the retreating Japanese waiting in the shadows. The trek out was a nightmare of tropical attrition. The jungle, a realm of constant damp, insects, and exhausting climbs, became a testing ground for the unspoken contract between Danny and Kiku. The weight of the locked box, which Danny had secured inside a waterproof canvas sack, was disproportionate to its size, suggesting a dense, complex mechanism within. It was the technological centerpiece of their crisis, a silent mystery demanding an answer. Kiku walked between two of the soldiers, bound only by a flexible wire around her wrists, a concession Danny had made to Rizzo's insistence on minimal security measures. She never once faltered or complained, moving through the undergrowth with a native efficiency that often put the American soldiers to shame. Her silence, however, was deafening. It communicated a profound fear, yes, but also a deep-seated knowledge. As they moved, Danny's mind wrestled with the implications of the box and Kiku's presence. Why was a field nurse present at a site housing such a sensitive intelligence artifact? Was she its guardian, its creator, or simply another unfortunate casualty? The strategic importance of the box was unconsciously confirmed when, halfway through the first day, they were ambushed. The attack wasn't a standard banzai charge. It was a coordinated, rapid-fire assault by a reinforced platoon of Japanese Marines. Their primary focus was not to kill the Americans, but to retrieve the container. They used the technologically superior Type 97 hand grenades and focused their Type 92 heavy machine guns on the area where Danny, carrying the box, was positioned. The assault was suicidal in its determination, a clear signal that the item in question was worth more than the lives of 20 Imperial soldiers. Danny and his squad repelled the attack, but not without casualties. Private Miller was badly wounded. The tactical retreat was forced, and Kiku's role immediately changed. Under the relentless fire, Miller needed immediate, skilled attention. Rizzo, the pragmatist, made the difficult decision. "She's a medic. Use her, Callahan. If she tries anything, I shoot her myself." Kiku, seeing the injured American, transitioned instantly back to her professional persona. Her terror receded, replaced by the detached focus of a surgical specialist. Using the American field kit, she expertly cleaned and dressed Miller's wound, her movements precise and efficient. As she worked, she spoke for the first time, a clipped, almost whispered sentence in surprisingly fluent English. "I am a nurse. I am not a spy. The box is danger, not knowledge." This revelation, her English and her warning, was a monumental psychological blow to the squad. It shattered the comfortable, simple narrative of a desperate prisoner and a glorious rescue. She was educated, sophisticated, and deeply concerned about the object they were carrying. The irony of the situation was immense. The only person who could give them intelligence was the one they were trained to distrust completely. The box itself was a marvel of advanced metallurgy. Engineers would later determine it was an alloy of titanium and specialized steel, a material too expensive and complex for a general field unit. The locking mechanism was not a simple key or combination lock. It utilized a series of recessed contacts and a pressure plate, suggesting a biometric or specialized electronic key. It wasn't designed to keep Americans out. It was designed to withstand the stress of extreme conditions, such as high altitude or rapid decompression. As Kiku was securing Miller, she saw Danny examining the box in the low light of the jungle camp. She subtly motioned for him to come closer and drew a simple diagram in the dirt with a stick. It was a cross-section of a high-speed projectile, clearly indicating a plane or missile, followed by a stylized representation of radar waves being scattered. The message, cryptic as it was, pointed to a single possibility that would chill Allied command to the bone: stealth technology. "We had been fighting the Japanese based on the known performance envelope of their Mitsubishi A6M0 and their Nakajima Ki 84, explained Colonel James Taggart, a former OSS analyst. The idea that late in the war they had dedicated a significant portion of their limited industrial capacity to developing something fundamentally revolutionary, something that could bypass our entire strategic radar network, it was unthinkable. But the determination of the Japanese pursuit force suggested the stakes were exactly that high. Danny erased the diagram and looked at Kiku. He didn't need to ask the question. Her eyes confirmed it. This was the key to a strategic asset that could potentially negate the vast American advantage in air power, particularly the high-altitude bombing raids of the B-29 Superfortress. The implications were staggering. If the Japanese possessed an operational system that could render their vital assets invisible to American radar, the entire strategy for the bombing of the mainland and the subsequent invasion was built on a catastrophic flaw. The Pacific War was not just a battle of resources, it was a desperate technological arms race, and the Allies, it seemed, might have just fallen behind. Kiku's rescue had not saved just one life. It had delivered a warning. Now, with a wounded soldier, a locked mystery, and an increasingly desperate Imperial Japanese force closing in, Danny and his squad had to race against the clock. The extraction point was still miles away, and the knowledge they carried, the simple, terrible truth that the enemy might have a weapon they could not detect, was heavier than any jungle pack. The subsequent 24 hours were a blur of movement and evasion. The Japanese pursuers, while relentless, seemed to be hampered by their own internal confusion, a possible result of Kiku's absence and the unknown nature of the device they were trying to recover. Danny noticed a pattern in their ambushes. They targeted areas with high visibility and open lines of fire, suggesting they were relying on optical sighting and standard communication rather than sophisticated radar tracking, a minor but crucial tactical relief. Meanwhile, the dynamic between Danny and Kiku solidified into a tense, operational alliance. She recognized her value as intelligence, and Danny in turn recognized her value as a silent strategist. During a brief halt near a fast-flowing river, Kiku elaborated on the box, speaking in hushed, careful English, her voice tight with controlled fear. She explained that she had not been a nurse. She had been a biometric technician assigned to a highly specialized research project. The box contained the core components of the Kagero system, Mirage system, a revolutionary acoustic dampening and radar-absorbent coating intended for the new Mitsubishi J8M Shusui interceptor rocket plane. The key components in the box were the chemical compound formulas and the calibration matrices for the J8M's unique high-altitude operational parameters. The Shusui was a rocket, Kiku explained, tracing the streamlined silhouette of a plane on a piece of bark. It was built to fly so high, so fast. The radar we use, it is blind at that altitude and speed. The Kagero was designed to make it acoustically silent to the ground observers and electromagnetically invisible to your new high-altitude radar, the AN/APQ-7, carried by the B-29s. This was the technological core of the paradox. The Allies believed that the sheer altitude and speed of the B-29 Superfortress provided an impenetrable shield. Flying at 30,000 feet, above the effective ceiling of most Japanese interceptors, the B-29 was the symbol of America's strategic dominance. Yet, Kiku was describing an enemy solution designed explicitly to breach that ceiling and neutralize the technological advantage of the American bomber fleet. The irony was acute. The Japanese, with their crippled infrastructure, had focused their last industrial effort not on mass production, but on a handful of technologically advanced, game-changing prototypes, a desperate attempt to level the strategic playing field. They had chosen quality and stealth over quantity. Danny's team, specifically Rizzo, was skeptical. A rocket plane that flies invisible. Sounds like propaganda, sister. Kiku met his gaze, devoid of emotion. Propaganda is built on dreams. The Kagero is built on mathematics. Ask your engineers what happens to radar waves when they encounter a specifically patterned molecular structure at extreme speed. The waves scatter. The plane becomes a void on the screen. The tactical reality of this revelation was horrifying. The B-29 raids, which had just begun to seriously cripple Japanese industry, would become sitting ducks. The U.S. Army Air Force relied heavily on the AN/APQ-7, a powerful H-2X-type ground mapping and bombing radar, for blind bombing runs over overcast Japan. If Kiku's information was correct, the interceptors carrying the Kagero could climb above the bombers, remain undetected by the radar, and strike from an entirely unexpected vector. The weight of the locked box transformed instantly from a physical burden to a strategic imperative. It contained not only the schematics for the stealth coding, but also the counterintelligence, the precise wavelengths and frequencies that failed to detect the coding. This was the cipher that could save thousands of American airmen's lives. Their race to the extraction point now carried the fate of the entire strategic air campaign. The extraction point was an old, abandoned landing strip, deep in a ravine, chosen specifically because it was outside the known range of Japanese ground surveillance. But Kiku revealed a critical tactical flaw. The ravine was directly beneath the standard flight path of the Japanese reconnaissance Zeros returning to Clark Field, and the ravine itself amplified the low-frequency sound of propeller planes. "We will be heard," Kiku stated simply. "The extraction plane, the C-47, it is loud. The Japanese will be here before your plane can land." This forced Danny into a final, impossible decision. They had to choose between the safety of the extraction and the security of the box. If the enemy knew the Americans were in possession of the Kagero formula, they would sacrifice everything to retrieve it, including launching a final, devastating airstrike on the landing strip. The knowledge needed to be relayed before the Japanese could prevent the successful extraction. Danny, looking at the jungle canopy, and then at the locked box, realized the strategic dilemma was a perfect reflection of the technological race. The speed of information was now more critical than the speed of a bullet. He ordered Rizzo to prepare the SCR-300 for a risky, high-power burst transmission, a move that would immediately compromise their position, but deliver the intelligence that could save the B-29 fleet. The jungle was about to get loud, and their 3 minutes of silence were officially over. Rizzo cursed under his breath as he set up the SCR-300 radio for a maximum power transmission. The standard procedure called for short, encoded bursts using a one-time pad. Danny, however, was demanding a lengthy, clear-text transmission. This was an unprecedented risk, the kind of breach of protocol that could result in a court-martial or worse, their immediate annihilation by directional enemy fire. "Sergeant, you're asking me to send a postcard to Tokyo," Rizzo hissed, adjusting the antennae. "Every listening post from Manila to Tokyo will pick this up. They'll pinpoint us down to the square yard." "We don't have a choice, Rizzo," Danny replied, his voice low and firm. "If Kiku is right, this information, the counter frequencies, the Shusui sealing, the acoustic dampening, has to get to Bomber Command now. The next big raid is scheduled for 72 hours. We can't wait for the general to unlock the box." The irony was thick. They were sacrificing the tactical secrecy of one small squad to save the strategic secrecy of an entire air campaign. The cost-benefit analysis was clear, but the price would be paid in blood on the ravine floor. Kiku stood beside them, her expression calm, but resolute. She dictated the technical details in precise scientific English, a language that was cold and technical, yet delivered with a desperate urgency. She started with the mathematical foundation of the stealth system, a specialized application of the Helmholtz principle, involving ultra-low-frequency sound absorption and a high-frequency molecular alignment. "Transmission begins now," Rizzo muttered. The radio unit hummed, the sound almost lost in the drone of the jungle, but its electromagnetic pulse was screaming across the airwaves. Kiku dictated, "Kagero system utilizes a barium titanate and ferrite composite. Molecular structure designed to introduce phase shift in incident X and S-band radar waves. Maximum effectiveness window, 8, 5 to 10 GHz. Shusui interceptor operates at 12,000 meters. Maximum velocity Mach 0. 75 upon glide attack. The counter frequency must be applied on the AN-APQ-7, specifically by increasing pulse repetition frequency to 5,000 Hz and utilizing an L-band search pattern. The system's acoustic dampening is neutralized by ultra-low frequency vibration below 20 Hz. Recommend use of heavy bomber engine noise for detection, not high-frequency ground listening." This was pure, unadulterated intelligence, the kind of technical data the Allies had been fighting for years to obtain. The details were so specific, so mathematically precise, that they immediately authenticated Kiku's story. This was not conjecture. It was engineering reality. In the command bunkers of the 5th Air Force, the garbled, high-power transmission was immediately flagged as a hostile broadcast, then rerouted. An overworked cryptographer, on the verge of dismissing it as a sophisticated German decoy due to the technical complexity, realized the Japanese accented English and the specific reference to the B-29 radar system were genuine. Within minutes, the entire transmission was transcribed and rushed to the chief intelligence officer. The response was not a congratulatory signal, it was an immediate, code-red directive. Acknowledge receipt. Execute immediate silent air cover. Local air superiority is now mandatory. Protect the source. The Japanese, however, were faster on the ground. The high-power transmission, as expected, was a beacon. Within 5 minutes of the broadcast's commencement, the distant, unmistakable sound of rifle fire echoed through the ravine. A large contingent of Japanese soldiers, having followed the Americans' trail, had heard the signal and were now converging on the transmission point. The tactical situation was dire. The squad was surrounded, pinned down by relentless fire. The jungle was alive with snapping branches and the cries of men. Danny and his team fought back with the ferocity of cornered animals, expending precious ammunition to keep the line from breaking. Rizzo, still hunched over the radio, was receiving frantic confirmation signals from command as Kiku continued to dictate the complex schematics of the stealth compound. Suddenly, a Japanese mortar round detonated nearby, showering the area with shrapnel and dirt. The impact destroyed the radio antenna, silencing the broadcast mid-sentence. The crucial data had been delivered, but the immediate threat remained. Kiku, recognizing the end was near, grabbed Danny's arm. "Listen, they will not stop. The box, It has a failsafe. If I open it now, it will burn the contents. The knowledge will be lost. You must trust me. I am the only key to the final piece. Danny was facing the ultimate trust test, relying on a captured enemy combatant with a technological secret that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. He made a lightning-fast decision. He tossed the locked box to Rizzo. "Cover Kiku. Everyone form a perimeter. We fight our way out." The strategic revelation had come at the highest tactical cost. They had the information, but now they faced a desperate, hand-to-hand fight for survival against an enemy that considered the information they held more valuable than their own lives. The final chapters of the Pacific War, the relentless bombings that would ultimately force Japan to its knees, had just been rewritten in a muddy, bloody ravine, thanks to the courage of a reluctant American sergeant and the technical expertise of a terrified Japanese nurse. The battle in the ravine was a brutal, up-close testament to the sheer desperation of both sides. The American squad, though outnumbered, had superior automatic firepower, utilizing the sustained, heavy punch of the bar and the rapid, controlled volleys of the M1 carbines. The Japanese forces, reinforced and driven by the urgent need to retrieve the Kagero Corps, fought with a terrifying, almost fanatical discipline, relying on coordinated grenade attacks and bayonet charges. Danny's team formed a tight defensive semicircle around Kiku and Rizzo, who was clutching the locked box. The fighting quickly devolved into a series of individual duels in the thick undergrowth. The air was heavy with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. The irony of the situation was evident in the Japanese tactics. They were attacking in waves, using the outdated and poorly effective Type 99 machine gun, while their entire objective was to reclaim the secret to futuristic stealth technology. Their strategy was modern, but their resources were relics. During a momentary lull, a new threat emerged. A highly disciplined Japanese officer, armed with a katana, appeared through the smoke, leading a final, desperate charge directly toward Rizzo and the box. This officer was not interested in skirmishing. He was on a retrieval mission. Rizzo, seeing the glint of the sword, reacted instantly. He raised his M1 carbine, but the officer was too fast, utilizing the dense terrain to mask his final approach. Before Rizzo could get a shot off, Kiku lunged forward, not to attack the American, but to intercept the Japanese officer. She shouted a rapid burst of Japanese, a desperate plea or a furious denunciation that stopped the officer in his tracks. He recognized her. His sword faltered mid-swing. The ensuing exchange was short, sharp, and entirely in Japanese. It was a confrontation between two dedicated servants of the Empire, separated by a single critical act of defiance, her decision to speak, to betray the silence. "You have betrayed the Emperor!" the officer screamed, his voice strained with genuine anguish. "The Kagero is the lifeblood of our nation. It is a sacred trust." Kiku, stepping between him and Rizzo, spoke with a chilling clarity. "The sacred trust is meaningless if the nation starves and burns." "This is not technology for victory, Lieutenant. It is a key to prolonged, certain defeat. If they use this, the American response will be absolute and final. I am saving lives, American and Japanese." The officer, caught between his military doctrine and the horrifying implications of her words, the idea that the ultimate weapon might actually be the catalyst for the final catastrophe, was momentarily paralyzed. This delay was all Danny needed. He had been covering the flank, but his attention was now focused on the high-value target. He fired 2 controlled shots from his Garand. The officer fell, the glint of his katana dimmed in the mud. The collapse of their leader was the final straw for the remaining Japanese soldiers. They pulled back, melting into the jungle. Their mission failed, their secret compromised, and their tactical objective lost. The ravine fell silent once more, but the silence was now a heavy, oppressive blanket over the exhausted Americans. The cost was paid immediately. Miller, wounded in the initial ambush, had succumbed to his injuries during the intensity of the close-quarters fight. His death was a stark reminder of the price of the intelligence they had secured. Kiku, trembling but outwardly composed, looked at Danny. She had risked her life twice, once to save him, once to save the intelligence. "The fail-safe," she whispered, pointing to the box. "I must open it now. The final component. It is not a physical object. It is a formula written on a crystalline memory chip. It will detonate if not correctly accessed. It must be neutralized before the extraction plane arrives. The extraction was scheduled for 400 hours. They had less than an hour. The fate of the entire system, the stealth, the counter-stealth, and the lives of the soldiers involved, now rested on Kiku's ability to successfully neutralize the failsafe in a locked, highly secure box, using nothing but her knowledge and the limited tools of the jungle. The final act of the operation unfolded in the deep pre-dawn gloom, illuminated by a single, flickering pocket lamp. The squad established a makeshift final perimeter near the dilapidated airstrip. The extraction plane, a C-47 transport, was due any minute, and its distinctive twin-engine drone would be a final, irreversible signal to any remaining Japanese forces. Kiku, with Danny and Rizzo watching intently, began the delicate process of bypassing the failsafe. The box's outer casing was impervious to simple prying, so Kiku focused on the electronic locking mechanism. She instructed Danny to use a pair of metal tweezers from the first aid kit to create a microscopic short circuit on the pressure plate, a dangerous move that could just as easily trigger the internal detonation device. The Japanese relied on the warrior's spirit, the banzai charge, a later commentary would reflect. But their ultimate defense was not a bayonet. It was a pressure plate and a failsafe, a technological commitment to secrecy. The irony of the war was that its most ferocious physical combat was being waged to secure information that was essentially abstract: mathematical formulas, chemical compositions, and frequencies. As Kiku worked, she spoke, her voice a low, steady murmur. The most critical piece of the Kagero system is not the coating itself, but the calibration matrix. It defines how the pilot must fly the Shusue at high altitude to maximize the phase shift effect. Without the matrix, the coating is just expensive paint. It is what your military needs to predict the interceptor's attack vector. After several excruciating minutes of microscopic adjustments, they heard a faint, almost inaudible click. Kiku slowly depressed the pressure plate. No explosion. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled in custom-made foam, was a single object. A crystalline wafer, slightly larger than a coin, covered in microscopic etchings. This was the memory chip containing the full calibration matrix and the final sensitive chemical formula. It was a testament to miniaturization and advanced technology, a secret worth thousands of lives. Kiku quickly located a single, tiny, heat-sensitive relay on the wafer. This is the failsafe. It is designed to burn the data, if tampered with. It must be neutralized with a precise application of cold. Using a small amount of ether from the American field kit, a common anesthetic, she managed to chill the relay just enough. The danger was past. The information was secured. Suddenly, the deep, powerful thrum of a radial engine cut through the pre-dawn humidity. The C-47 was making its approach, its running lights dark, flying dangerously low into the ravine. The window for extraction was closing rapidly. But as the plane lowered its flaps, another sound emerged, high-pitched, insistent, and terrifyingly fast. A pair of Japanese Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters, alerted by the C-47's engine noise, were sweeping low over the ridge. They weren't using radar, they were using acoustic detection, just as Kiku had warned. The Oscars made a quick, devastating pass, their fuselage-mounted Type 1 machine guns spitting tracer fire. The C-47 pilot, a veteran of the Pacific, immediately poured the coal to his engines and pulled up, aborting the landing. The fire was accurate and destructive. The plane, heavily damaged, banked hard and disappeared back over the ridge, leaving the Americans on the ground alone once more. The strategic irony was final and absolute. The rescue mission that delivered the secrets of stealth technology had been thwarted by the enemy's simple reliance on acoustic and visual detection. If you've been gripped by this story, ensure you're subscribed for our full analysis and the amazing details of what happened next. We're heading into the final chapter of this incredible saga. The failure of the C-47 extraction was not the end. It was the forced crucible of the final triumph. Danny Callahan, Rizzo, and Kiku were now facing a final, impossible reality. They had the most valuable intelligence of the Pacific War in their hands, but they were stranded, deep in enemy territory, with the Japanese closing in. Danny made the final strategic command: destruction of all non-essential equipment, including the damaged SCR-300 radio. They would carry only the crystalline wafer, their essential weapons, and the wounded. Their new plan was primitive: move north, toward the coast, where a small American submarine, the USS Gato, was performing routine reconnaissance. It was a journey of over 100 miles, but it was the only way out. The intelligence secured during the high-risk transmission, however, had already reached General Curtis LeMay's command in the Marianas. Within 48 hours, the entire B-29 fleet's radar systems were recalibrated. The ANAPQ-7 was adjusted to the L-band frequency, and the pulse repetition was increased, exactly as Kiku had dictated. The first B-29 raids after the recalibration were a stunning success. Japanese interceptors, including early prototypes of the Shusui carrying the Kagero coating, were suddenly and violently visible on the radar screens. They were intercepted and destroyed before they could reach effective altitude. The Japanese technological marvel was neutralized before it could ever be fully deployed. The technological paradox was resolved. The enemy's secret weapon was defeated by the very person who helped design it. A Japanese nurse who chose human compassion and strategic reality over blind adherence to military doctrine. Danny Callahan, Rizzo, and Kiku, against all odds, reached the designated coastal area a week later, battered and starving. They were picked up by the USS Gato in a daring night extraction. The crystalline wafer was delivered intact to the waiting analysts. Kiku, the former biometric technician, was debriefed for months. Her testimony was deemed so critical, and her strategic value so high that she was granted immediate secret asylum in the United States. She worked alongside American engineers, helping to refine the counter-stealth measures, her expertise turning the tide of the air war. Her story was erased from the official record, a strategic intelligence secret deemed too valuable, too complex, and too politically sensitive to reveal. She was the ghost in the machine of Allied victory. Danny Callahan was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His action, the single impulsive act of saving a non-combatant, was officially recorded as a strategic reconnaissance mission, resulting in the acquisition of high-value enemy technology. The rescue became a footnote. The intelligence became the victory. He was forever changed by the experience, forced to reconcile the brutal dehumanization of war with the single, profound act of cross-cultural trust that saved his life and the lives of thousands of airmen. The Kagero system was never fully deployed. Its technological promise was immense, but its strategic utility was negated by a single, desperate radio transmission. The story of Danny and Kiku became the ultimate paradox of the Pacific War, a conflict defined by unparalleled technological violence, ultimately decided by a moment of profound, simple human connection and a shared recognition of the futility of total war. The Pacific War, the war of relentless hatred and unforgiving battle, had been secretly won not by the massive deployment of the B-29, but by the smallest, quietest, and most dangerous act of intelligence, a whispered formula dictated by a prisoner, a technological key passed from one enemy to another, forged in the terror of a forgotten ravine. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the untold paradox of the Pacific War. If you want more stories that explore the hidden technology and desperate human choices that defined World War II, please hit the like button, share this video, and ring the notification bell to join our community of history enthusiasts. Thank you for watching.